Again, books, probably more so than blogs and others, is what is my approach? What is my tone? If if you've got like a podcast or a blog or a YouTube channel, and from time to time you vary the tone, if you sort of step out of character for a little bit and do something that's a one-off or that's a little outside of the norm, that's okay. If you're writing a book or an audiobook, then it's going to be more jarring because it's not going to feel quite right. Unless that's part of your, what you do, breaking the fourth wall or something like that, like you see in certain stories and characters. But that's because that's their thing, is that they do that from time to time. Even though when you're writing a book or an audiobook, something and this may even go to longer or full length video type things, is working on it on a regular process. Now, maybe your release schedule, it's not going to matter as much. If you're releasing once a year, it's not going to matter as much if you're off by a day, especially if you're off by an hour or two. But doing the work on it, you actually working on it, I think it is very important to make that a regular process. If you're writing a book, it's something like, hey, I'm going to spend 15 minutes a day working on my book. 2 hours a week, whatever it is, and do that. Schedule it just like you would anything else, like a release kind of thing, so that you have the habit and the momentum of doing that work. If you're talking about a book or an audiobook, it is probably more critical to consider editing tools or resources, people, things like that. What groups, what items, what resources am I going to use to help make this look better, to do the editing, to do the cleanup, to make sure that it's not just spelling and grammar, it's that it flows right, things like that. With a book or an audiobook, you need to consider things like obviously the title. What's the cover going to look like? Where or how are you going to get it published? And even if you're self-publishing, there are rules, but there's definitely steps that you're going to take. So you're going to want to walk through that. And there are great ways to do self-publishing, but you need to think through those, just as you need to think about your branding for your blog or your podcast or your YouTube channel. And then publishing and promoting. If you self-publish, you have to deal with all the promotional stuff. If you actually get a publisher out there, they are going to provide you some of this stuff. They're going to, send you on a book tour or whatever it is. They will help be part of that and help promote it. But there's still going to be some of that's going to fall on you. So how am I going to go about this? Am I going to send out emails? Am I going to try to go on get some speaking engagements and talk about it? Am I going to, paint my car with advertisements about my book and things like that? There are a lot of options for that. So it's nice to think of it holistically through all of these, is sort of, what does this look like when it's done? What would ideally be my goal for this? So your education platforms, these are a little different, but also you're going to find out somewhat the same. Now, the difference with these are you really have you have a more specific goal. If you're on if you're doing anything else of these that we've talked about, it's really about just communicating. I want to get my ideas across. In an educational type platform, it's not only do I need to get my ideas across, but I want to give the reader, listener, viewer a way to assess, and maybe myself, I want to assess if they have properly absorbed the content that I'm producing. There's a difference between saying, hey, here's an example of me coding in Java, and trying to make sure that the person that is watching that learned about collections in Java. Those are different goals, different things that you want to do, and different approaches maybe that you're going to take. So in an educational type platform, is first, think about how do you, because audiences are going to learn different ways, but for yourself, since you are the teacher, how do you best teach or communicate? Is it easiest for you to teach by writing or by talking or by sitting in front of a whiteboard or sitting at a keyboard? How is that? What is best for you? What is most comfortable for you? And then considering your audience, is your approach better suited to a class? Is it better suited to more like a one-on-one kind of approach? And if it's both, then how do you see this moving forward? Do you see this as being something where there's a group and there's a discussion, or is it more, let's say, live or pseudo live, or something that's very fine? It's very easy to do that in an offline manner, where you're just like, you record yourself doing stuff, you send it off, some student looks at it later, and it's going to be fine. They'll be able to pick it up. A syllabus is always critical for a class. It tells the student, what are you going to learn? What are the items we're going to learn? How are we going to learn them? As a content creator, as a teacher, how am I going to progress from point A to point Z, the things that I need to or want to cover as part of this lesson? Is it, am I going to do like a 1 hour, sit down for an hour and they read about a lecture and stuff like that, and then they're off and running? Or are there maybe some checkpoints along the way? They maybe learn for a little bit, spend a few minutes learning, and then there's a quiz or a laboratory session or something like that that helps them. It really is like, helps that information sink in. What's your target market? What do your students look like? Are they computer savvy? Are they not computer savvy? Would they know about, like, if you put it on Udemy, would they even know what a Udemy is? Would they even use that? Are they already there, or are you going to have to attract them to that platform as well? Which, sort of, that last point is, how does that platform help you bring in students or impact it in a way, maybe negatively? Maybe that the way you want to produce and the tools that are there for you to produce your content are targeted towards a platform that your users almost never will see. So part of your process, part of your thought process needs to be, how am I going to bring these customers, these students that I so think will benefit from this, to this platform, because this is really where they need to be to learn this. So some key points through all of these, because I batched this stuff, I sort of grouped all this stuff together in one presentation, where they could have easily been a half dozen presentations and gone in depth into each of these. So some things to think about as a whole: always need to consider, like, your focus, your approach, your theme, and thinking about how you communicate, how your topic needs to be communicated or is best communicated, and also the audience. When in doubt, you want to cater to the audience, not make the audience cater to you. And so, like, for example, I think of like a nightly newscast. If the guy or girl that's the news reader is in a clown suit, it's not going to jive with news of the world, particularly if it's about murder or war or theft or whatever, dark stuff. It's not going to jive. So consider your audience. What do they expect? How do you best communicate whatever the content is, and use that as your sort of your foundations to build out your theme and your style and your approach. Regular work, momentum, habits are key to any of these things. You need to go into, if you're going to create a blog, if you really want to do a blog, there's a difference, I guess, between like recording yourself a couple of times versus a podcast, or writing a couple articles versus a blog. And those things are really around scheduling. Releasing is doing it on a regular basis. If you could claim you're a writer if you wrote a book, but really you're not a writer unless you're writing on a regular basis, probably daily. It's the same thing with being a blogger or podcaster or whatever, is that you've got to have that regular cadence. Your audience will appreciate it. Your audience will grow because of it, and it will make you better. It's one of those skills that you're going to learn, is how to schedule your world in a way that you can do that on a regular basis. It's sort of a note, I didn't really hit on this too much. It always takes longer to prepare and present a topic than it does to simply talk about it. If you wanted to sit down and, like I mentioned, or like have a little Java session that's about collections in Java, maybe you could sit down and do the 5 examples you want to do in 5 minutes. But if you're going to record that and turn that into a session, it's probably going to take you a lot longer to do that. I would say, in that case, probably at least 15 minutes to a half an hour. And part of that is too, there's a minimum amount of time that's just required to set up and do anything, even a blog, to get yourself set up, to be in the right frame of mind, to get your tools up, to start writing, to go through the editing pieces of it, to put your thoughts down, to type it out, and all of that kind of stuff. And you'll get better as you do it. The first couple of times I did podcasts, they probably took, easily probably 3 or 4 times the content length to do it. So it was, and probably more than that. So like if it was a 20-minute podcast, it probably took me 2.5 hours to do an episode. And now again, it depends on your topics and all that kind of stuff. If you're doing research and all that, there may be pre-work, but just the doing it technical part of putting your content into your form, it's going to take time. So, and there's almost always, there's snags, there's delays, there's all kinds of stuff that can occur. So prepare for it. Assume the worst and then prepare for it. You put in the work on these things. If it sounds like there's work involved, there is. I mean, these things they take time and effort. And if you're going to go through all that, make sure you take some time to pat yourself on the back, use it, put it in a resume, put it out on, let people know that, that's something that you do. Don't be afraid to look at ways to monetize it. Don't be afraid to look at ways to use that to help emphasize that what you're talking about on that topic, or some of the related topics. Like if somebody says, would you know how to create a community or launch a website, and say, yeah, here, I've done it. Don't be afraid to make use of those things and benefit from it, because you've done the work. You should earn the kudos as well. With all these I've mentioned, you're like your theme, your personality, your style, your approach. I would warn you, if you select something that's not you, if the voice that you use, the theme that you use is something that's not really doesn't come as natural to you, that's okay. But just remember that you have to be comfortable with that, or you've got to be able to grow into comfort with that. If you look at, exactly, it goes back to actors and actresses, but you'll see some that you can tell that they're in a role that is very much themselves. And then, granted, really great actors and actresses, it's harder to tell, but then you can also tell where there's stuff where they're, as they call, stretching themselves. So you may somebody that does, like, I don't know, lighthearted comedy over and over again, and then suddenly does this serious dramatic role. And if you're going to do something like that, that's outside of what's your normal personality, just realize that can be taxing, that can be draining to do. And it can be more complicated, because then you have to step out, have to step into that role in order to figure out how to communicate and still be true to that role or that theme. And it's not impossible, but it's just one of those things that, if you're stepping into this work, you want to make sure that you go in as much as possible with your eyes wide open.